November, the month when autumn's last breath becomes cold and unforgiving. As the sun sets early, it casts long shadows across the empty streets. When the wind howls through the bare branches with whispers of invisible things. It is the month that stands on the threshold between autumn and winter, where darkness comes early and lasts long. The stories you are about to hear come from real people who claim that these events actually happened to them. They shared their experiences on various online forums, seeking answers, comfort, or perhaps just to warn others. These aren't stories made for entertainment. These are memories that haunt their nights, experiences they can't explain. Moments when ordinary November evenings became something far more sinister. So sit down, close the doors, and turn up the volume. Because tonight we're going to learn about 5 terrifyingly true stories about cold November nights. Stories of strangers who shouldn't have been there, of sounds that defied explanation, of moments when the comforting curtain of security burst to reveal something dark beneath. Let's get started. The story follows a single mother living in a suburban area of the Pacific Northwest. He shared his experience of November 2024, and the terror in his words still resonates. It was a Thursday night in early November when everything changed. I put my 4-year-old daughter to sleep around 8:30. The weather had been brutal that week. Temperatures dropped into the 30s, the strong wind rattling the old windows of the rental house. Outside, dead leaves were scattered on the road, making sounds like nails on wood. I remember taking some melatonin that night because I had trouble sleeping. The neighborhood always felt safe, quiet. Families with small children, pensioners, the occasional college student. Nothing ever happened there. I kept telling myself this. Around 11 o'clock, I was washing the utensils when I heard a loud noise from outside. It came from the direction of the backyard. I froze, hands still in the soapy water, and listened. It was quiet in the house except for the sound of the refrigerator. I told myself that maybe it was a raccoon knocking over a trash can, or a branch that fell from one of the oak trees. I dried my hands and went to the back window, removed the curtain, and looked out. The motion sensor light should have been on if something large moved, but the yard was dark. Only shadows and fence lines were barely visible in the glare from the nearby houses. Feeling uncomfortable but trying to be logical, I went back to the kitchen. Then I heard it again, this time closer, a scraping sound, as if something heavy was being dragged across the concrete. My heart began to beat loudly. I grabbed my phone, checked that the volume was up, and moved quietly to turn off the kitchen light so I could see the outside better. The backyard seemed empty. But then I saw movement near the fence. A figure. Someone was standing there, just outside the chain link between my yard and my neighbor Ben's property. They didn't move, just stood there, in front of my house. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. My mind raced. Should I call the police? Maybe it was Ben. But Ben was in his 60s and always announced himself. This figure was long and broad. I counted to 10 as I tried to steady my breathing, and then again. The figure was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived, because then I heard the sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Heavy steps. Not in the backyard, in my house. Someone walked through my living room. The floor in our rental was old hardwood, and it creaked with every step. I could track the sound even as it moved from the living room to the hallway, towards my daughter's room, towards me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My phone was in my hand, but my fingers couldn't make a call. Then I heard something that brought me out of my shock. My daughter's door opening. The characteristic creaking of those hinges which I'd been meaning to oil for weeks. Instinct took over. I ran. I didn't know who was in my house or what they wanted, but I knew I had to get to my daughter. I picked up the largest knife from the kitchen block and quickly walked down the hall, flicking every light switch I passed. My daughter's door was open. I charged in, knife picked up, ready to fight to the death if necessary. But the room was empty. My daughter was sitting on the bed, rubbing her eyes, confused by all the lights in my frantic entrance. "Mom, what's wrong?" I quickly checked her closet, under the bed. Nothing. I grabbed her, wrapped her in her blanket, and carried her to my bedroom, closing the door behind us. That's when I called 911. "There's someone in my house," I said softly into the phone, my voice shaking. "There's someone who broke into my house." The dispatcher kept me on the line while officers were dispatched. It felt like hours, although it probably only was 5 minutes, before I heard her knock on the front door and announce themselves. I kept my daughter in the bedroom while they cleared the house. What they found destroyed everything. There was no one inside. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows or unlocked locks. But here they found something that made my skin crawl. Dirty footprints. Big boot prints coming in through the basement window, going through my house, and going back the same way. The window had been unlocked, something I didn't even know was possible because I had never been down there. But the really scary part came the next morning when I was talking to my neighbor, Ben. He asked if I was all right, if the police had caught them. I asked him what he meant. He said, "Home invasion. At my place. It happened around midnight." I felt upset. I asked him to tell me everything. 3 men had broken into Ben's house through his basement window. They wore dark clothes and masks. They bound him with zip ties, cut his mouth when he tried to scream, and held them at gunpoint while they ransacked his house for more than 12 hours. They took all the valuables, electronics, jewelry, cash, even her car. Ben was tied up, tortured and threatened in his own home while I slept next to him, completely unaware. The time frame established by the police was even more frightening. They vandalized both houses. He saw me looking out his window. He waited 30 minutes after I turned the lights off before going into Ben's basement. But first, they tried me. Those footsteps I heard, that figure in the yard, someone opening my daughter's door, it was all real. The police theorized that when my lights suddenly came on and they heard me wandering around, the intruders panicked and left, deciding to target Ben's house because they knew he lived alone. I was 30 seconds away from facing armed intruders. My daughter was 30 seconds away from seeing something no child should ever see. If I hadn't heard that sound, if I hadn't woken up, if I was in a deep sleep because of the melatonin, those people were never caught. They're still there somewhere. After recovering, Ben left, saying he could no longer live in that house. I don't blame him. I moved out after 3 weeks. Now I couldn't sleep there. After dark, every sound, every shadow, every moment became unbearable. I still think about that night in November. I still wonder what would have happened if I had slept, if I hadn't heard them, if I hadn't scared them away. When I look at my house, I think about the shape of my garden, looking at me. Sometimes I wonder if they even look at my new place, looking forward to another chilly November night when the wind will be strong enough to cover the sound of the basement window sliding open. This story was shared by a student from New England about an October tradition that went horribly wrong in the fall of 2023 and ended in early November. Every year, my friends and I had a tradition. The four of us, me, Marcus, Jenny, and Kai, met every Friday in October to tell ghost stories. We had been doing it since freshman year, and by senior year it had become sacrosanct. We called ourselves the Oktobervereinigen, which sounds pretentious now, but we were 21 and thought we were clever. We usually met at Marcus's apartment off campus, but we always did something special on the last Friday in October. That year, Kai suggested we visit Meadow House. Meadow House was an abandoned mansion in the woods at the end of a dirt road about 5 miles outside of town. It was built by a railway trader in the 1890s, but had been vacant for decades. The roof had mostly collapsed, the windows were broken, and there was an oppressive, eerie feeling about the whole place. "It would be perfect," Kai insisted. "We're going to light up the old garden and tell stories with the house in the background. Come on, this is our last year. Let's make it memorable." Against our better judgment, we agreed. It was unusually cold on 31 October of the same year. The temperature had dropped below 40, and it had rained continuously throughout the day. As evening came and we rode to Meadow House, the air smelled of wet leaves and decay, that special autumn scent that was somehow both comforting and unsettling. We arrived just after dark. The house was visible against the gray sky, more a ruin than a building. Black holes where windows stared back at us like empty eye sockets. Dead ivy clung to the walls in twisted patterns. The garden, where we planned to build the fire, was overgrown with weeds and surrounded by crumbling stone walls. "It's perfect," Marcus said, though his voice had lost some of its enthusiasm. "Let's put out the fire before we freeze." We collected wood from the surrounding forest and built a fire in the old stone fire pit that had been used by previous visitors. The flames cast dancing shadows on the garden walls, and the house behind us seemed more alive, more awake. Jenny went first with her story. She told us about the classic urban legend, the vanishing hitchhiker, but she also added local details that made it feel real and immediate. We all played along, gasping and laughing at the right times. Then it was Marcus's turn to tell us about something he called the sledgehammer slaughter, a serial killer who crushed the bones of his victims and left them shattered. The doctor determined that every bone in the first victim's body was systematically broken, with the skull bursting like a fallen plate. It was amazing and detailed, and we loved it. But this is where things got weird. Really strange. 4 days later, on Monday, I was walking to class when I saw police cars and ambulances blocking a road near campus. A crowd had gathered, all whispering into their phones. I asked someone what happened. She said with a pale face, "A family was murdered last night, the 4 of them, at their house just 2 blocks from here." My stomach hurt, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. Murder happens. This is terrible, but it has nothing to do with the story Marcus made up around the campfire. Then, details began to emerge. The family was beaten to death. His legs were broken. Police said it appeared someone had used a blunt instrument, possibly a sledgehammer. Every detail of Marcus's story, down to the specific injuries, turned out to be true. When I called Marcus, he was already panicking. The news had reached him, too. We agreed that it must be a coincidence, a terrible, impossible coincidence. We met that Friday, and everyone discussed whether we should continue the tradition or not. Jenny shared her story just last week, and the vanishing hitchhiker was just an old legend. There was nothing real about it. It was simply bad luck for Marcus's story to be true. Bad timing. We decided to continue. That night, Jenny told a new story. It was about ticks. Transformed, giant ticks the size of domestic cats that moved at terrifying speeds and attached themselves to their victims, paralyzing them. She described how victims wandered around the city, completely unaware that these bloated parasites attached to their backs were slowly killing them. It was disgusting and creative. We told her it was the worst thing we had ever heard. Kai actually went behind a bush to throw up halfway through. The following week, there was an outbreak. A parasitic infection spread to 3 dorms on campus. The students were hospitalized for severe anemia, fever, and a mysterious rash that looked like circular bites. The CDC got involved. Classes were canceled. Then Kai came to me with his theory. "It's the home," she said. We sat in the coffee shop on campus, both tired and scared. There's something in the Meadow House. There's something that fuels our stories, that makes them real. I wanted to tell him he was crazy, but I couldn't, because I was thinking the same thing. Every time we went there, we felt like we were being watched. The house always seemed aware of us, alive in a way we couldn't define. "We only go there 4 nights a year," I argued weakly. 4 nights in 3 years. How can that be enough? "Maybe it's enough," Kai said. "Maybe it's getting stronger, and now it's strong enough to make things real." We called a crisis meeting. The 4 of us sat in Marcus's apartment trying to figure out what to do. Jenny suggested that we never go back to Enghus, that we end this tradition there. But Kai had another idea. "We have to go back," she said, "one more time. We have to put a fire inside the house, at the heart of whatever it is. We have to see it, understand it. Maybe we can stop it." It was madness, but we were also 21 years old and thought we were brave. More importantly, people were hurt because of our stories. If there was any chance that Kai was right, we had to try. We went back on the first Friday in November. The temperature had dropped below 0 and frost covered everything. In the cold, the house looked even more frightening, even more dead. We forced open the front door and dragged in the wood, building a fire in the main hall where the floor was still relatively intact. The flames cast dancing shadows on the garden walls, and the house behind us seemed more alive, more awake. "So, who goes first?" Marcus asked, his voice echoing through the empty house. Before anyone could answer, we heard it. Footsteps, coming from the second floor. Slow, deliberate steps moving from one end of the house to the other, right over our heads. We all stopped. The steps stopped. Then we heard something else, a low, rumbling laugh that seemed to come from the walls. "We have to go," Jenny whispered. "Now." We didn't argue. We picked up what we could and ran. Behind us, the house seemed to move, breathing, fully awake for the first time. We heard glass shattering, wood cracking, and the creepy laughter that followed us into the forest. We never went back. We never ended our tradition, and we never told another story. But here's what keeps me up at night. We had already told 3 stories at Meadow House. Jenny's disappearing hitchhikers, Marcus's sledgehammer killer, and Jenny's tick attack. 3 stories that came true. I had to tell a 4th story that night in November. I had it all planned out. I was going to tell them about something I called the November rain, about people who disappeared without a trace during the first snowfall of the year. We left before I could tell it. The story was never told. What was in the house was never fed. But now, November has come again, and the first snow is coming tonight. I keep thinking about the 4th story. What would have happened if I had told it? What can still happen to it? Because sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps in my apartment. Slow, deliberate steps that sound like they are coming from inside the walls. And I wonder if leaving Meadow House was enough, or if what's out there follows us home. This description comes from a hiker who experienced something extremely disturbing in the woods of northern Minnesota during November 2023. I have been hiking and camping in the Boundary Waters for 15 years. I know these forests like I know my home. I understand sounds, the way the wind blows differently through pine branches than birch, how thin ice on remote lakes makes sounds like whale song, the patterns of animal movement as winter approaches. So when the woods went completely quiet that November night, I knew something was catastrophically wrong. In early November, just before the lakes froze over, I set out on a 5-day solo trip. The forecast calls for clear, cool nights, perfect for those who like solitude and don't mind temperatures in the 20s. I've taken this trip dozens of times before, always in November, always alone. The first 2 days were perfect. I walked about 15 miles each day, saw a moose, heard wolves in the distance, saw the northern lights dancing green and purple in the black sky. November in northern Minnesota is beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Everything is preparing for the severe winter ahead. The animals are desperate and eat what they can. The trees are bare. The lakes are partially frozen, creating eerie landscapes of ice and open water. The third night I camped on a small peninsula jutting out into one of the larger lakes. I could see for miles in every direction, frozen marsh to the south, dense pine forest to the north and west, the lake stretching east until it disappeared into darkness. I built my fire, ate my freeze-dried dinner, and settled into my sleeping bag around 9 o'clock. The temperature had already dropped below 20 degrees. My breath created clouds of steam inside my tent. Then I noticed the silence. There is always a sound in the forest. Air. The branches creak. The ice accumulates on the lake. Small animals passing through the bushes. Owl hunting. Even in the dead of winter, the forest is never completely quiet because silence means something is wrong. Silence means someone is a stalker. I lay in my tent and didn't listen to anything. Perfect, nothing. No wind, not the sound of any animal. Even the ice on the lake had stopped its eerie song. It felt as if someone had silenced the whole world. I experienced this once years ago when I accidentally got too close to a bear den. The forest was still quiet. All the small animals were hiding and waiting for the danger to pass. But I was on a peninsula. I could see in all directions. There was no bear, no wolf pack, nothing. This silence pressed on my ears like a physical weight. I realized that I could hear my heart beating unusually fast in the absence of any other sound. I could hear the blood rushing in my veins. Just then, I heard footsteps. Not animal footprints. These were bipedal, human. Passing through the frozen marshes south of my position, moving steadily towards my peninsula. But the ice there was not solid enough to support a person. Anyone who passed through that swamp would break the thin ice, make tremendous noise, perhaps shout for help. The footsteps were silent, except for the soft crunch of frozen grass, regularly, in haste, coming closer. I grabbed my headlamp and zipped up the tent, filling the campsite with light. Nothing. The swamp was empty, but the footsteps continued and now began to move toward my camp at the foot of my peninsula. I could track them by sound alone, 20 feet away, 15, 10 feet away. My fire had burned down to embers, giving barely any light. I spun in circles, the beam from my headlamp cutting through the darkness, looking for who or what was coming. The footsteps stopped 5 meters from my tent. I stood there, knife in one hand, bear spray in the other, breathing heavily, the light from my headlamp illuminating nothing but empty forest. Then I heard the sound of breathing. Deep, rapid breaths that felt wrong, too slow, too deliberate, as if someone were manually controlling each inhalation and exhalation. "Who's there?" I called. My voice sounded small and scared because of the oppressive silence. No answer, just keep breathing. Then I smelled it, rotting and decomposing, like something that's been dead for weeks. That smell should not persist in the cold of November. Everything must be frozen, preserved. But it was the smell of actively rotting, of actively decomposing flesh. The breath circled my campsite. I wandered around with it, trying to point the light at the source, but there was never anything there. Just empty air and the horrible smell and wheezing coming from something with damaged lungs. Air passing through pathways that shouldn't exist. This lasted for several hours, but perhaps only 20 minutes. The thing with the breath goes around my camp. I wandered along with it, challenges that went unanswered, finger on the trigger of my bear spray, ready to empty it at the first sign of physical presence. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The breath stopped. The smell faded, and the sound of the forest returned. The wind in the trees, the ice crunching on the lake, the hoot of an owl in the distance. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat by my rebuilt fire, all the candles I had lit, knife in my lap, waiting for morning to come. When the sun finally came up hazy and weak over the frozen lake, I broke camp in record time and started walking. I didn't make this up. 3 miles from my campsite, I found the body. It was half frozen in a bog, partially submerged in snow and mud. A passenger, probably male, although the decomposition made it hard to tell. He had been dead for weeks, maybe months. His backpack was still on. His hiking boots still had their laces on. He probably broke through thin ice and was unable to get out, dying of hypothermia alone in the forest. I called it on my satellite phone. We stayed with the body until the officers reached us, which took 6 hours given the remoteness of the location. They asked me questions. When had I found her? Had I touched anything? Had I seen anything unusual? I didn't tell them about last night, about the silence and the breath and the smell. What would I say? Was anything moving through the frozen marsh on ice too thin to support a body? Had I smelled it rotting from miles away in temperatures so cold that the flesh would freeze solid? But here's the one I can't stop thinking about. The traveler died alone, probably begging for help that never came. He died in these woods, in the cold, in the dark, and somehow part of him was still here, still walking in the marsh, still looking for his camp, for safety, for warmth, still breathing with damaged, dead lungs. The official report said he had been dead for about 6 weeks. She was reported missing at the end of September. That means he died in the early October. That means his body lay in the swamp for more than a month before I set up camp 3 miles away. I have not returned to the Boundary Waters. I don't think I can, because now I know that the forest is not always empty. Sometimes silence means something worse than a stalker. Sometimes it means dead people walk. This story was posted during November 2024 by a young woman who lived alone in a city apartment. She swears every word is true. I moved into my studio apartment at the beginning of November. It was an old building in the historic district. Beautiful architecture, but old. A place with radiator heat and windows that rattle when the wind blows. The landlord warned me that the walls were thin and that the building had character, which I assumed meant strange noises and jumbled corners. I am a night owl. I work in graphic design from home, and my best work happens between midnight and 4 in the morning. So I had a habit of staying awake when everyone else in the building was asleep. Used to the odd creaks and groans of an old building settling, accustomed to the sound of the wind rushing through poorly sealed windows. But I was not in the habit of scratching. It started on my 3rd night in the apartment. I was working at my desk with headphones on when I felt more than just heard something, a vibration through the floor. I took out the headphones and started listening. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It came from my door, rhythmic, deliberate, like nails being slowly dragged across wood. 3 scratches, then a break. 3 more scratches, another break. I picked up my phone and opened the building's security app. We had cameras in the hallway, one of the selling points of the apartment. I turned on my floor cam. The hallway was empty, but the itching continued. I could see my door in the camera feed. No one was standing there. No one was touching it, but I could hear it clear as day. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I went to the door and looked. Nothing. Empty hallway. But the scratching was so strong that it now seemed like it was coming from my apartment. I pressed my ear to the door and tried to find the source. Then I heard the sound of breathing. Someone was standing on the other side of my door, inches from my face, breathing slowly and steadily. I jerked back, heart pounding, picked up my phone again, checked the camera. Still nothing, no one in the hallway. But the breathing continued, and now I could see the door shaking slightly, as if someone was resting his weight on it. "Who's there?" I yelled, trying to look braver than I felt. Breath stopped. The itching stopped. Complete silence. I waited, phone in hand, ready to call 911. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself that it was what I had imagined. The old building, the new environment, the stress of the move. My mind is playing tricks. But it happened again the next night. Same time, just after midnight. Same pattern, itching, then breathing. And then, when I checked the camera, the hallway was empty. The 3rd night, I was ready. I set up my camera in the hallway and pointed at my door. If there was something there but not visible on the building's camera, my camera would probably catch it. Midnight has come. Itching started. I pulled up both camera feeds on my laptop, the building's camera and my own. Both showed the same thing, an empty hallway. But the scratching was so intense that it now seemed as if whatever was doing it was inside the apartment with me. Then my doorknob started turning. I saw it moving slowly in the camera feed, but there were no hands on it, no visible power. Only the handle turns, millimeter by millimeter. The locking mechanism clicks. I had it locked. I checked again, but the door opened. I picked up the baseball bat that I had bought the day before and stood in the middle of my studio, ready to fight whoever came through that door. The handle turned completely. The door opened 6 inches, held in place by a chain lock that I had installed myself. Through the gap, I could see the hallway, still empty, but there was something. I could feel it. It can be felt looking at me from a distance of 6 inches. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking. "Get out of my building." The door closed with great force, causing the door frame to shake. Then I heard footsteps running down the hall, away from my door. Heavy footsteps echo off the walls. I checked both cameras. Nothing. No one escaping. No one in the hallway. But I could hear it clear as day. Whatever it was became more blurred as it ran towards the stairs. I called the police. They came, searched the building, found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No one on the stairs. The building's night watchman said he was at his post all night and saw no one come or go. But my doorknob had turned. My door was open. I had video of what happened. The police could not reveal this. They told me to call if it happened again, and clearly walked away suspicious. This did not happen again. Not like that. But other things began. I would come home to find my apartment rearranged. Little things. My coffee mug moved from the kitchen to the bathroom sink. My notebooks were kept in a different order. My desk chair turned to face the door instead of the window. I would wake up with scratches on my arms. As I slept, 3 parallel lines like nails were drawn on my skin. I started sleeping in long sleeves, convinced that I was doing this myself in my sleep. But the scratches kept coming, sometimes in places I couldn't reach. The temperature in my apartment would suddenly drop, going from comfortable to 0 in a matter of seconds. My breath would vanish into thin air. Ice formed on the inside of my windows, even though it was still November and not that cold outside. I lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of scratching and breathing and my stuff moving and waking up with marks on my skin. 3 weeks I watched every moment in that apartment. I broke my lease, lost the deposit and first month's rent, returned with my parents. The landlord tried to keep my entire deposit, claiming I had damaged the door, leaving deep scratches in the wood on both sides, he said. I swear the scratches were not there when I walked in. After I left, I did some research. This building had a history. A woman died in my apartment in the 1960s. She lived alone like me, worked into the nights like me. On November 1st, she began telling friends that someone was trying to break into her apartment. She called the police repeatedly, claiming that someone was scratching at her door and trying to break in. He's never found anyone. She was found dead in her apartment 3 weeks after the first complaint. Heart attack, says the official report, but neighbors said she was scared, hadn't slept in days, claimed something was in her apartment. There were deep scratches on both sides of the door to her apartment, as if something was desperately trying to get in, or something desperately trying to get out. I don't live alone anymore. I never want to be alone again, because now I know that walls can't always keep things out, that locks don't work against something that has no body. Sometimes, when you're alone in an old building in the middle of the night, you're not as alone as you think. And sometimes the thing scratching your door isn't trying to get in. It's already trying to warn you about what's inside. Our latest story is about a man who experienced something impossible on a rural highway during November 2023. He insists it happened exactly as he describes. Driving home from a conference in Denver, I took the roads to Wyoming because I hate interstate traffic and the mountain roads are beautiful in November. The trees are bare, the roads are empty, and there's something peaceful about driving through that kind of isolation. It was around 7 in the evening when I left the small town where I had stopped for dinner. The sun had set hours ago, and the temperature was dropping fast. The dashboard said it was 28 degrees outside. The road ahead was a ribbon of black asphalt, cutting across empty farmland, my headlights the only light for miles. I had been driving for about an hour when I saw that figure on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a deer. We had problems with deer collisions on these rural highways, and I saw warning signs every few miles. But as I got closer, my headlights revealed it was a person, a woman, standing, with her arms crossed in the universal sign of hitchhiking. I slowed down. My first instinct was to keep driving. You don't pick up hitchhikers on empty highways at night. This is how horror movies begin. But something stopped me. Maybe it was cold, 28 degrees, and he wasn't wearing a jacket. Perhaps it was the isolation. We were at least 3 miles from the nearest town in either direction. Maybe it was just basic human decency. I passed her about 20 feet and looked in my rear-view mirror as she walked toward the passenger window. She was young, probably around 20, with long black hair and pale skin. She was wearing jeans and a thin sweater. No coat, no bag, no bag. I rolled down the window. "Are you okay? Do you need a ride?" "Oh God, yes," she said, her voice mumbling with the cold. "My car broke down about 5 miles ago. My phone died. I've been walking for an hour." The red flag should have been gone. Where was his car? Why didn't I see it? Why didn't he have a jacket? But she looked so cold, so desperate, that I opened the door. "Come in. We'll help you with something." She slid into the passenger seat, and immediately my car was filled with her scent. Something sweet and rotten, like flowers left in a vase for too long. I turned up the heat and got back on the highway. "Thank you very much," she said, rubbing her hands. "I thought I was going to freeze to death in there." "What happened to your car?" I asked, looking at the odometer. 5 miles ago," he said. "I should see it any time." "It just died," she said. "All the lights went out. I tried to turn it back on, but nothing happened. I thought I was going to keep going until I got help or someone passed me." We drove in silence for a few minutes. I kept looking for his car, a car stuck on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. But we passed 5 miles, then 6, then 7. Nothing. "Are you sure it was 5 miles back?" I asked. She looked at me, and I saw her face fully in the dashboard light for the first time. Her skin wasn't just pale, it was gray. There was blue color on his lips. Her eyes were somehow wrong, too big, too dark. "I think so," she said. "Hard to tell in the dark." Another mile passed, then 2. I began to get seriously worried. Where was her car? Was she taking longer than she thought? Was she in shock, confused by the distance? "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation casual. She gave me some incredibly vague answers. She was meeting family, just passing through, nothing specific. And she kept staring at me with the wrong eyes. We had driven for 15 miles when I realized that my gas gauge was dropping incredibly fast. I was drunk in town. I should have 3/4 of a tank, but as I watched, the needle fell toward the void.
"There's something wrong with my car," I said, tapping the gauge. Sarah bent down to look. His breath on my neck was cold. Not just cold, but very cold, like touching ice. "Maybe you should step aside," she whispered. The temperature had started to rise. The engine was overheated. It made no sense. An hour ago, the car was running perfectly fine. Now, many systems failed at the same time. I pulled onto the shoulder and put the car in park with the engine running. Checked my phone. No signal. Absolutely. We were in the middle of Wyoming. "I need to look under the hood," I said, reaching for the door handle. Sarah's hand reached out and grabbed my wrist. His fingers were cold as ice, so cold they burned. "Don't get out," she said. "I have to." "Don't get out." There was something in his voice now, something not at all human. The rotten smell was strong and overwhelming. I turned to look at him, and what I saw froze my blood. His face changed. The skin retracted and became transparent. I could see black shapes moving underneath, like worms or veins or something worse. His eyes had turned completely black. His mouth opened very wide, where many teeth were visible. "You shouldn't have stopped," she said. Her voice now layered, several voices speaking at once. "You should never stop on this road." I released my wrist from his grip and threw myself out of the car, fell on the cold asphalt, staggered to his feet, and ran away. Behind me, I heard the sound of a car door opening. Footsteps were heard. But it wasn't the footsteps of a woman in sneakers. They looked like hooves walking on the pavement, or itches, something that clicked and scraped with each step. I ran into the darkness, off the road, into an empty field, slipped on rocks and frozen grass, fell, to stand up, continued to run. Behind me, chased whatever was in my car, and it was fast. Then I saw light, headlights on the highway. A truck came, the engine making a loud noise in the cool night air. I changed direction, ran down the street, waving my arms, yelling for help. The truck slowed down, stopped. A door opened and a man's voice said, "Are you all right, friend?" I looked back. What was chasing me was gone. My car was parked on the shoulder, passenger door open, engine still running, but there was no sign of Sarah or who she would become. My car broke down, I managed to say. "I need help." The truck driver was an old man, maybe 60 years old, with a bushy beard and suspicious eyes. "Is your car over there?" "Yes." "The engine is running." "I know, Can you give me a ride to the next town?" He studied me for a long time. Then he nodded toward his truck. "Come in, but we'll leave your car here." I didn't argue. I got into his truck and he drove back on the highway. We drove in silence for miles before he finally spoke. "You picked up a hitchhiker, didn't you?" I stared at him. "How did you?" "Because you're the fourth person I found on this stretch of highway in the last 2 years. You all had the same story. Picked up a woman, things went wrong, you ran away, she disappeared." "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Don't know, but there are stories about this road, decades old, about people stopping to help someone in need, and then he trailed off. Some of them don't make it." He drove me to a truck stop 3 miles down the road, bought me coffee, won't tell me his name, told me to report my car stolen and never mention that woman again. He said, "No one will believe you." He was right. When I called the police to report my car, they found it exactly where I had left it. The engine still running, the passenger door open, the tank was empty, completely empty, even though I had filled it 2 hours ago. The engine was completely cold, even though it was running when I ran away. There were scratch marks on the passenger seat. Deep gashes in the upholstery looked like they were made by claws. They wrote it off as an attempted theft. My car was believed to have been broken into, and when the truck driver stopped, the culprit had fled. The case is still open, unresolved. But I know what happened. I know what I picked up on that highway, and I know I'm lucky. Because later when I searched online, I found stories, disappearances on that stretch of Wyoming highway. The inhabitants' vehicles were found abandoned, doors open, engines running, people who were never seen again. And I found historical records. The story of the hitchhiker on National Highway 287, Stories from the 1950s about a woman in a thin sweater who appears on cold November nights. Some say she's a ghost. Some say she froze to death while waiting for help. Others say he's something worse, something that eats up at kindness, at those who stop to help. I don't know what it is, but I know it's real. And I know that on cold November nights, when the streets are empty and it is completely dark, she's there, waiting for the next person who is kind enough to stop by, the next person who won't be as lucky as me. I don't drive on that highway anymore. I travel interstate even though I hate the traffic. Because now I know that some streets are haunted. Some parts of the highway are about things that shouldn't exist. And some good deeds are worth more than anyone has to pay.
Five stories, 5 cold nights in November, 5 experiences that defy explanation. Were they real? The people who shared these stories believed they were. They went through these moments of terror, confusion, and fear. They have scars, some visible, some psychological, all permanent. November is a strange month. It sits on the border between autumn and winter, between the end of the year and the end of the season. This is a time of transition, of change, of darkness descending. And in that darkness, strange things can happen. Perhaps there is something about cold November nights that dissolves the barrier between worlds. Perhaps darkness and isolation create conditions where fear becomes reality. Or maybe these stories are exactly what they claim to be, true accounts of real horrors that happened to real people. Next time November comes, when cold winds blow and darkness falls early, remember these stories. Lock your doors. Check your windows. Don't pick up hitchhikers. Do not explore abandoned buildings. Don't assume you're alone because you can't see anyone. Because sometimes the scariest truth is the simplest. The world is much more strange and dangerous than we want to believe. Stay safe out there, and thanks for listening.